Welcome to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast, featuring advice and interviews about athlete branding. Learn how marketing, public relations, and broadcasting can grow your brand. We also have special episodes to talk about recent news, events, and anything in the world of sports. The podcast is sponsored by Pliable, a versatile marketing, PR, and broadcasting company that identifies opportunities and creates tailored content for its clients. Now it's time to roll. Here's your host, Glynn.
Thanks, and welcome to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast. Today, we're talking about turning talking into becoming a personal brand. Let's talk with Jen Mueller, who is going to be here today. She's a keynote speaker, a communication expert, a sports broadcaster, which is near and dear to my heart, of course, and her company is called Talk Sporty to Me. Well, Jen, talk sporty to us.
Yeah, let's do it. I love a chance to do that, always.
Yeah, this is going to be fun because from your background, you're a sideline reporter for the Seattle Seahawks. You're a longtime member of the Seattle Mariners TV broadcast team. You have over 25 years of experience covering the NFL, the NBA, MLB, and NHL, and more. You've mastered kind of the art of building relationships and delivering these impactful stories. Talk to me about how you got into the business.
Well, I was always a sports fan. I have always been super competitive, but it is truly a nod to my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Steele, who suggested that instead of pursuing a career in teaching, that maybe, because I like to talk a lot and I'm not afraid to talk in front of people, that maybe broadcast would be something that I would consider. And so when I started to dive into that and what that meant, I realized that you could make a choice and you could go the news route, the political route, or you could do something really fun like talking sports. Now, back in the mid-90s, women were just allowed to start into that sports industry. It definitely was not a given. So I had backups to the backup plan, but really it was a high school guidance counselor pushing me and then just taking whatever the next obvious step was along the way.
Well, and to me, it starts obviously when I talk about athlete branding. You've hit already a nail on the head, which is trying to combine what your passions are along with a future career. And obviously, kudos to, obviously Ms. Steele for doing that and seeing that so early for you. Did you play sports, and what sports did you play?
I played all the sports there were through high school. Part of that was I went to a small Lutheran school. So if you did not play all of the sports, you might not be able to field a girls' team. Basketball was my first love, but I played volleyball. Then it rolled into basketball season, softball, track, swam during the summers. This is obviously back before we specialized in any one sport. But I really do appreciate what you take from every sport. And while I'm super competitive, I was not phenomenal at every sport, right? I was great at basketball. I really enjoyed swimming. I became a swim team coach. I enjoyed breaking it down, but I was not playing a starring role on the volleyball team or the softball team. So you have to learn how to contribute in different ways. And I'm really grateful for all of those experiences.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it shaped you as to the person you are today. And obviously, it comes with some of the other skills that sports bring to the table: leadership skills, communication skills, all those things that, you now are applying to your job. Talk to me about kind of growing up and maybe when you realized that you had this aha moment that you could become a sports broadcaster. Take me past, that high school spot, whether it was an internship, whether it was somebody you met and you were like, this is about to get real.
I don't know that I reflected on that until much later in my career, because at the beginning, it is such a grind, right? You are just looking for anything and you're grinding in a lot of different ways. You were grinding in the hours that you worked. I had a full-time job before I graduated from college, which was, again, a huge blessing and something I'm grateful for. But I was taking college classes. I was expected to be working a full-time job. You're working until midnight. Sports hours, they are nights, weekends, and holidays, which is great if you love what you do, but that also doesn't leave very much time in the day for anything else. So you are physically grinding in the hours that you are working. You are mentally grinding because you're trying to set up the next step in your career. And financially, you're not making a lot of money when you first get into sports. And so I think it was a lot later on when I realized that it was going to be worth it. I ended up on the Seahawks sidelines in 2009. That was my first year doing sidelines for them for the entire season. It was 6 years earlier that I saw a female colleague who was on the sidelines. And I thought, you know what? That would be really cool. Like, that never crossed my mind. I was a high school football official for 10 years. I had created a niche in the sport, but never thought it could translate to the sidelines. And I spent 6 years positioning myself for that job. But when I got it, I think that was probably the moment where you're like, okay, all the hours working in the
All
dark
right.
by yourself. Like, I think this is what it was all for.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really cool. Now, was there some networking that obviously took place? Did that woman mentor you a little bit, or how did you kind of, get toward the path of getting there? You don't usually go from, obviously job to then Seahawks quickly.
No, you don't. And I was behind the scenes. So while
Oh,
I
there you go.
wanted to be on TV, I knew that when I was in college, right? Again, not afraid to talk in front of people. But my first jobs were behind the camera. I was
Yeah.
a producer, I was an associate producer. But the way that I networked was using the opportunity that I had right there, which was media credentials. I was working in a sports department. My shift at the sports department was 3:30 to 11:45 at night. And at that time, Mike Holmgren was the head coach of the Seahawks, and their practices were at 10:30 in the morning. Their media availability ended by 1:30 in the afternoon. So I would use the credentials and the access that I have to go hold a microphone for the reporter, for the photographer, for whoever was there. And I showed up every day as if it was my job. So I tell people, when we think about networking, I think a lot of times we focus on how many people we know. That's not what's going to get you the job, especially in sports, because I need to know how you're going to show up on a daily basis. I need somebody who can vouch for the fact that when you are working 21 straight days during baseball season, you still show up on day 22 with a smile on your face and easy to work with. And the only way we can do that is to pick a space that you want to be seen in and be there to the point where people don't remember it without you. So for me, that was Seahawks practices. Without being told, without being paid, I showed up every day. I showed up to every press conference, every game. It was a grind, but by the time it was open for me to do an audition, and it's not that my female colleague didn't mentor me, but it was far more important to just keep showing up, to warm up the space, to learn the people, to not force it, but to just be there. Because when it came time to audition, people already thought I worked for the organization.
Yeah.
It was really easy because I knew
Yeah.
everybody that I was supposed to know. And so if you're thinking about, your audience or wherever you are in your career, the space you might want to be seen at is Starbucks every day, because you're just looking to get a foot in the door. It might be showing up to the gym at the same time every day. It might be going to the same extracurricular activity or picking a hobby where people see you and they start to know you and they recognize you in the space and they strike up conversations. And those are the connections that are ultimately going to pay off.
That's the grind, right? Like,
Yep.
again, you talked about grinding earlier, and I think right there you talk about, grinding and showing up every day. And that's what athletes do. They are creatures of habit. And I think that's why they make such great employees, is because they do put forth that effort, and they're going to show up and you can count on them and they're dependable. So then let's walk this through. So you join the Seahawks, and then kind of what happens from there.
I go on to spend 17 years. This is my 17th season on the Seahawks sidelines. I have been with them every step of the way. I have a Super Bowl ring. I've also
Nice.
continued my TV career, but it's given me a lot of examples of the power of branding through sports conversations, and also the importance of recognizing relationship building a few seconds at a time. When I go into a locker room, I have about 15 to 30 seconds to make an impression on these guys. So oftentimes when I am doing this, I am counting on one word at a time. And I will measure how many hellos I get in a locker room. And when we think about that in the course of our conversation, we don't think a whole lot of it. But when you don't have the opportunity to schedule a coffee meeting, to go to a networking event with these guys, we don't eat lunch together, you don't go to happy hours, you're not doing virtual meetings, like this is your chance. And the locker room is open for a really short amount of time. I need to find every single way I can to build trust and rapport. And in our daily interactions, we overlook this all the time. I don't have an opportunity to do that when I'm in a locker room. I really have to maximize all of those interactions and be very strategic and intentional with how I talk to them, how I set up that opportunity for the interview, how I get them to trust me in the moment, because these guys are going to talk to me whether they win or lose. Winning is really, really fun.
Yeah.
Losing is still something that we talk about 10 minutes after a game. And so you've got to make sure that those relationships are in place and that you're really clear in communicating. And all of that gets set up every time you walk into a locker room.
Yeah, I completely agree. Having worked in pro sports myself, I know exactly what you mean. There's kind of this locker room chaos. You're kind of figuring it out. You're kind of talking to the right people, kind of like surveying the room, right? You got to find out, who's hot right now, or, and who's having their moment, or who might have the angle to the story you might be looking for, or that no one's thinking about. So I like what you're saying there about that locker room setting. And I think that also really applies to athletes who have been in that locker room setting, and they're going to know exactly what we're talking about as we talk about this moment in time, and that opportunity to go up to an athlete who's had a great performance or had a terrible performance.
Well, and here's what I tell our rookies. So I work with the Seahawks rookies at the beginning of the season. In fact, I did our session at the beginning of June with all of them. And what I have said for years is a couple of things. Number one, you know that you are going to have a second job. So let's work on that right now. Right? Let's keep an eye on the future while we are on the field right now. There's a lot of parallels between sports and business, but let's start with communication skills. Not only can you boost your profile by being the person, the go-to person in the locker room, but when we do that, let's be really careful about how we choose our words. So there's two lessons here. Number one, when it comes to those tough games, accountability, feedback, tough conversations, take a page from really good coaches. You will never hear a really good coach compliment a guy who doesn't deserve it. Pete Carroll is the master at this. I worked alongside Pete Carroll for 14 seasons. You know what he would never do? He would never tell you that somebody did a great job when they didn't. And there's a huge difference between doing a great job and doing your job. And in sports, we hear that all the time. In business, we keep defaulting to the same words, and it causes really big problems in tough conversations. But athletes and coaches give us this whole different language and lexicon, right? They battled, they fought, they executed, they came up short. There's all different ways to describe an outcome, and sports is really good at that. Number two, as a sports fan, the way you talk about a game tells me a lot about you. And I can find 5 different characteristics about you in the way that you talk about a game. So make sure that your personal brand comes through when you talk about the outcome, the coaching decision, the player, the highlight. Choose those words carefully. And I'm not saying that you have to like every single one of them, but understand that that is your opportunity to show somebody who you are and pull the curtain back in a slightly unsuspecting way, but one that continues to build your brand and distinguish you as a leader.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And so then let's talk sporty to me, and kind of how you're, again, making this comparison to the locker room communication, actionable insights for businesses, helping them level up, as you say, their conversations and leadership skills. How are you doing that?
I will tell folks how I communicate in a locker room, whether that is measuring success or it's getting the interview that we need. We see examples of great communication skills in sports all the time. The one about accurate feedback is just one example. When I ask for an interview, it is a very specific formula because I don't have a choice. I have to get that right then. In business, our standards aren't very high because we've got all sorts of time to get this done.
Yeah.
We might think in business that we're being efficient or that we don't want to waste time, but you know this, when you are on TV or radio, you literally cannot waste time because they will count you down to break and you are going to break whether you are ready to be done or not. And so it is truly showing how we become effective communicators. It's not about talking more. In fact, we talk less. Conversations can be measured in seconds, not minutes. So, how do we do that? By being very clear in the expectation, the timeline, the action item that we want people to take in a conversation. How do we use the question, how are you, to spotlight our accomplishments and success without bragging, but making sure that we're on the radar of folks and that they know what we actually do and how we contribute to a team's success.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I think another thing you brought up is, talking points or sound bites, right? That as a reporter or as an athlete, usually are coming out of your mouth. Like they're just consistent. And I think that some of the best athletes that deliver those sound bites, or as you said, are emotional, but also able to communicate well. I think that makes that athlete that much more likable because they aren't just regurgitating the same stuff over and over again, but they are kind of relying on that basic foundation of I'm not going to go completely off the rails here, but I'm going to convey my emotions and I'm going to talk about the subject matter. Like you said, Pete Carroll not complimenting somebody that's not doing a good job. And so I think you almost have to go into that knowing that and having that mentality.
And you've got to find small ways to practice that. Otherwise, it's not going to work when you're on the spot, whether you are doing a post-game interview or whether you are having what could end up to be a critical networking conversation in a different space. Authenticity in athletes, it is a practice skill. Some people certainly come by it naturally. So Richard Sherman is a great example of this to me. Richard Sherman has been Richard Sherman the entire time I have known him. He has always been very comfortable in his skin. Now, whether his approach to a question would be my approach is not the point, but that entire team was very authentic to themselves, whether it was Doug Baldwin, Marshawn Lynch, Russell Wilson, KJ Wright, Bobby Wagner, right? If you were to study how they answered questions, there are certain words and phrases that they use frequently. And those are their words and phrases that give them an authenticity without going off the rails. Now, sometimes Sherman went off the rails and it made for some of the best moments, right? Like we all know what those moments are. But that goes back to what message do I actually want to convey? What words are mine? So if I was explaining this in a different setting, I would say this. Nobody ever hits a home run in my book. You can hit a single, you can hit a double. But in my book, you are going to launch, torque, crash, crush, clobber, blast, whatever you want to do, because you don't just hit a home run, right? There's a lot of words that I can choose that make that moment more real. And it actually makes it a more authentic experience if I tell you that Julio Rodriguez mashed the ball 400 feet instead of saying he hit a long home run. Use that as kind of the framework. Now, when we go to talk about any sort of outcome, which words are you? Which words convey your emotions without saying he sucked? That was a horrible decision, right? Like you can go one way, but let's practice using the words that further your ultimate interests.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because I provide media training, obviously, for athletes. And that's one of the biggest things that we work on is coming up with the words that they probably would like to say, but that they can use on as a crutch to then be able to have that in the heat of the moment so they don't make that mistake.
Yep. Absolutely. And there's lots of ways we can practice doing that. But I think we default to using the same words over and over again because it's easy and because we are going to get a response. And it's just true, right? Conversational norms and the general nature of human beings, you are going to get a response. What I would encourage people to do is level up those communication skills just like you do, because now we are going to get into a richer conversation, a more real conversation, deeper insights when we go a little deeper with our conversation skills.
Yeah, I like exactly what you're saying. So let's do this. Let's look back at your career so far. And I have a lot of athletes that I work with. One of the things they say is, I want to get into sports broadcaster, I want to be a reporter, or, I want to be an anchor, or they see, Sports Center and they want to do that too. What kind of advice would you have for an athlete that then wants to turn their athletic career into a sports broadcasting career?
Well, number one, from this side of things, become the go-to interviewee for whoever is doing interviews post race, post match, post game. If I know that I can count on you, win or lose, you become hugely valuable to me. And whether you nail it every time or not, it doesn't matter because the brands see you, the networks see you, and they see you as well spoken. KJ Wright, who was on our Super Bowl winning team, and then the next year, he is currently a coach with the 49ers. And we were talking about it, and he said, Jen, the biggest mistake, and KJ, I always considered one of my go-tos in the locker room. But he said, my biggest mistake, Jen, was that I was not in the media more in my first few years. I knew that I wanted to go into either broadcasting or coaching, and I feel like I had some missed opportunities. So even if it's uncomfortable, do it. And if you know the person who's doing the interview, so I actually work on the team broadcast. I will encourage guys to say, hey, come and talk to me. We'll do an interview. If you don't like it, it's not going to make air. But you're not going to get any better unless we have this practice. The other thing I would say to athletes is use your niche and your experience to your advantage. If you are a track athlete and a tennis athlete and a golf athlete, like go, there are so many opportunities, but it might not start in the broadcasting realm. You might need to start with some digital assets, whether that's writing an article or providing some social media content. But once you get the access as a media person, now you get a chance to talk to those folks who can make decisions. Now you get a chance to show people how you show up. So do the same thing that you would do as an athlete. Look for the little opportunities, stack your wins, and then look for your opportunities.
No, that's great. I love that advice and spot on as somebody who's has done it myself, to be in those situations. And, I can remember getting my first media credentials and, being in those pro sports locker rooms. And then I was, as much as I was in awe, right, for the first time in a big pro locker room, I was also looking around and I was looking at who could I get to know in here that might actually help me in the future of my career. And whether it was holding their microphone, right? They had to do something else, or they wanted notes on what did that guy just say, or whatever it was. Like that's the kind of stuff that you can be a resource. So I think there's so many opportunities when you put yourself into the right position. So let's talk about what you do and how people can kind of get in touch with you and learn more. Obviously, you've got your website, talksportytome.com. What can people do there? I know you're a great keynote speaker.
Yes, you can find out the topics that I speak on for keynotes. You can inquire about your next event that you want to book. You can also find episodes of my cooking show, I Cook, You Measure. It's a fun one for your audience because I bring athletes on the show with me. And you would be surprised at, you would be surprised at their level of comfort in a kitchen and just their overall cooking abilities. Some of them know how to do it beautifully. Others have a hard time with a can opener. So it is always an adventure. It is always a great conversation.
Where do you host this? Where do you do this?
So I host them at my house. You can find every episode on YouTube. Again, the show is called I Cook, You Measure. So yeah, it's a fun one to dial up if you want to see some of my athletes in a different setting and learn a few things in the kitchen as well.
Well, I think that's, going back to what we said earlier too about some of the standardized things that we all say. When you get an athlete in a kitchen, which may in some cases be an uncomfortable environment, you're able to at least have different types of conversations, have a little bit of comedy probably along the way. And now you're building that relationship. As you said, there's not a lot of times where you're going to be interacting with the athletes outside of the locker room. So it's so important to create those opportunities. And I'm sure that show does that. And I'm excited to check that out. So definitely want to do that. How do people book you for keynote speaking engagement and kind of what's your target audience when you usually do these keynotes presentations?
Yep. I have got a lot of medium to large size companies that hire me, and it is the outside the box score. That's what I call it, outside the box score approach to effective communication, right? I will pull back the curtain on what happens in a locker room, but more importantly, it is the skills that make us effective, that make us better teammates, whether we're talking about a business team, a sports team, so that we are working together, we're on the same page, we're having the conversations that we need to have, and quite honestly, so that we are showing up with confidence. There's far too many times that we take ourselves out of consideration because we have taken ourselves out of a conversation. We might not know how that conversation is going to end. We might not know if we've got all the answers. That's not the point. The point is to show up with confidence and trust the skills that you've got. So I give you a few more tools to put in your kit for that.
Yeah, I like that. Perfect. Well, it sounds awesome. Again, the website is talksportytome.com. You can also find Talk Sporty to Me on Instagram, Twitter at Talk Sporty to Me, and also at Jen Talk Sports. Obviously, we found out about YouTube today. We're going to learn about the cooking show you got, so that's going to be really cool. And again, thanks again for kind of dropping all this information for athletes, for also, business leaders and future people that want to get in touch with you, because I think they really have an opportunity to hear from somebody who's doing it the right way. So
thank you very much. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, sounds good, Jen. All right. I am Greg Glynn. We are glad you could tune in, and stay pliable, my friends.
Thanks for listening to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes from today's episode and catch up on recent episodes at pliablemarketing.com. We also encourage you to share topics and guest ideas by emailing our production staff at pliablemarketing@gmail.com. We love hearing from our loyal listeners and athletes who want to grow their brand. So jump in and be part of the podcast, because that's how we roll.